As we edge forward to a goal of net zero, the reality of that aspiration runs headlong into the ongoing and increasing need for energy. Net zero means completely negating the amount of greenhouse gas emissions produced by human activity. The belief is that a combination of emissions reductions and the implementation of carbon sequestering can and will balance the volume of carbon in the atmosphere. So the quest is underway, but at what cost? Alberta is in a unique position to capture and store enormous amounts of carbon. The question is, can we realize this opportunity? And what are the challenges in doing so? Hello, I'm Stuart McNish, and you're listening to Conversations Live. Conversations Live is a long-form public affairs dialogue series addressing the big issues of our time. For each episode, we bring together subject matter experts for a deep conversation designed to provide you with information that helps you make more informed decisions. I hope you enjoy it. Tonight, we are meeting on the traditional territories of the Treaty 7 nations, whose people have and continue to call these lands home. On this land and in this place, we strive to learn together, walk together, and grow together. Conversations Live is a long-form public affairs dialogue series that seeks to advance our understanding of the big issues of our times. We also strive to draw attention to organizations that make a difference in our community. Tonight, I want to introduce you to Jillian Bowerman of the Calgary Police Youth Foundation, who is with us tonight. And the foundation is committed to keeping the city's children safe from victimization and crime. The foundation funds 6 unique programs that focus on education, crime prevention, and early intervention. I encourage you to find out more about this remarkable foundation and, if possible, look for ways that you might be able to support them. Now to our topic, Alberta's carbon capture advantage. What is it, or rather, what are they? What are the advantages? Are they achievable? And, as I mentioned in the video, at what cost? To answer these questions and others, we have an extraordinary panel of experts. They are Ian MacGregor of Sturgeon Refinery, Zach Parston of KPMG, Claude Letourneau of Svante, Deborah Yedlin of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, Justin Riemer of Emissions Reduction Alberta, and Peter Tertzakian of Studio Energy. Now, just before we begin, for anyone who is in the audience here or online, you can pose a question by going to slido.com, enter the password Conversations Live, and send in your question. I will receive them here, and while I may not get to all of those questions, they will help to inform me about maybe some topics that I may not have anticipated or thought to bring forward. Now, to further set the stage, here is Mario Canseco of Research Co., who conducted the following poll about Albertans' views on the province's energy future and the role of carbon capture. Mario, I'm going to ask...
When Albertans focus on the energy sources that they believe will play a significant role in Canada's energy future, more than 3 in 5 residents look at oil and gas and renewable energy in the same fashion, with nuclear power way down the list at just 32%. This is a significant departure from the numbers observed on this same question in other Canadian provinces, where the emphasis on oil and gas is lower. About half of Albertans say they are very informed about carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Residents aged 18 to 34 are more likely to have seen, read, or heard something about this technology than their counterparts aged 35 to 54 and aged 55 and over. 3 in 4 Albertans support Alberta's energy companies relying on carbon capture, utilization, and storage, while fewer than 1 in 5 are not in favor of this course of action. On this question, there is little difference in the views of residents who live in Calgary, Edmonton, and the rest of Alberta. The involvement of the Government of Alberta in fostering the use of carbon capture, utilization, and storage gets a positive review from just over 7 in 10 Albertans. Almost 2 billion Canadian dollars have been invested or committed by the provincial administration for these efforts over the past decade. By a 4-to-1 margin, Albertans believe the adoption of carbon capture, utilization, and storage will position Alberta as a unique option for energy production. This is an important finding at a time when the commitment of specific industries to reducing greenhouse gas emissions has been questioned at the international level. For Conversations Live, I'm Mario Canseco from ResearchGo.
First off, it's our people. The energy sector is made up of some very talented individuals who do these kinds of things for a living. They take innovative approaches and processes and do amazing things to capture value and to deal with emissions challenges. Second is our geology. We have some great pore space available to do this in a safe manner. We also have a great policy and regulatory structure that has enabled long-term investments to be made. So CCS isn't new in Alberta. It's been done for quite some time now. Shell Quest is one of the major projects that's been operating for some time in this province. But it's being looked at seriously by the cement industry, by the power industry, by the oil and gas industry, both conventional and oil sands, and by other industries as well in terms of the utilization. And we've actually turned a lot of paper concepts and lab bench scale tests into actual industrial demonstrated uses in this province. You have the good fortune of having someone on your panel here today who helped build one of the largest CO2 pipelines in the world, and we'll hear from him later. But there is just the right mix of talent, regulatory policy, fiscal incentives, as well as geology, and the point source capture or the point source emissions that make it easier to capture than other locations. So that would be my points.
Deborah, I see you anxious to jump in.
Yeah, I just want to, I wanted to add that not only do we have the people, but we had a premier in 2009, Ed Stelmach, who saw this as something that was really important. And we saw the funding of the Alberta Carbon Trunk Line, the money that was dedicated then in 2009, $495 million. And that really started Alberta's journey on being first mover from a carbon capture, sequestration, and transportation perspective. That infrastructure has been absolutely critical in terms of putting us to where we are today. What's really interesting is that we know it, but not a lot of people across the country know it, and I can guarantee not a lot of people outside Canada know that we have this infrastructure. So it's something that is going to enable us to continue to build on what we can do from a carbon capture standpoint, but we also have a story to tell.
Zach.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think one of the things that we also have is a diversified emissions profile. So we have, yes, a lot of energy companies, but we also have petrochem, cement, and fertilizer companies as well. And in that emissions profile, we have a very strong industry partner. And that in that partner, who else is going to take on this challenge in terms of the risk profile that's required to build these projects, the capital intensity to fund these projects, if not energy companies that exist?
Claude.
And not to forget, once you've captured the CO2, you need a place to store it, and we have tremendous amount of storage capacity at probably one of the lowest costs you can think around the planet.
Ian.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just go back a bit. You need three things to do carbon capture and storage. You need a pure source of CO2. You need a pure source of CO2. If it's not pure, you can't move it. So you have to compress it, make it into a liquid, and then you can move it. Then you need a pipeline to move it. And usually the pipeline's pretty expensive. On trunk line, we spent $1.2 billion building the pipeline. And then you need a reservoir, and you have to make sure the reservoir works. So it can't be a science experiment. You got to make sure that the stuff goes down there, or you can't spend the money along the rest of the system. Usually the pipeline is the most capital intensive part. So in Alberta, we have lots of near pure or pure sources of carbon dioxide. They come from steam methane reforming. Those are 60% purity streams. If it's an old reformer, it's 100% already. So you don't have the risk of capture. You don't have the technical risk of figuring out, is this going to work? Then you can build the pipeline, and we've got reservoirs here that you can put it in. They're not saltwater sequestration reservoirs. Those are new science experiments. But we have depleted gas reservoirs, and we have oil reservoirs, and we know those are containers, and we know we can put CO2 in. So you can't, projects of this scale, you can't conduct science experiments. You have to have certainty to be able to put the size of capital involved in them. In central Alberta, we've got probably 1 billion barrels of light oil to come out of the ground using EOR, and there's about 10 billion tons of storage capacity in depleted gas reservoirs. So there's three things you can do. EOR, it's an oil reservoir, I get oil out, it helps pay for things. Depleted gas, I know I got a container, I can put stuff in it without risk because there used to be stuff in it for 10 million years. Pure sequestration in the saltwater ocean seems like a good idea, but there aren't many of them running at scale. So it's just something to think about when you do these things. If you want to do them at scale, no science experiments. You can't fund them. So, what drives me crazy because there's lots of announcements of all kinds of things, but when you try and say, can you really put the tonnage of capital away to be able to do these things, you sort of drive into a brick wall from a technology point of view.
Peter.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's said, and I don't think we should underestimate or undervalue the comments made about the availability of our reservoirs. So the way I think about it is that Canada was one of the first countries in the world, there's some debate about whether it was Canada or the United States, that commercialized the oil industry back in the late 1850s. And the original wells in Canada were drilled in Ontario, and the industry migrated to the West about 40 years later in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Since the early 1900s, at last count, I haven't counted lately, but it's of the order of about 700,000 wells have been drilled in Western Canada. And 700,000 wells, each one of those wells have been logged for information in understanding the geology. And we're one of the most unique countries in the world in a sense that that information is in a repository that is publicly available to oil and gas companies. So what I'm telling you is that we've spent the last 125 years here pulling carbon out of the ground, and we know where it is because of all the wells we've drilled. And now we're in an era where we want to put carbon back into the ground, and we know how to drill the wells, and we know where to put them, and all the well porosities and everything. And this is a huge advantage over any other jurisdiction that I know of in the world. I mean, I don't know, Ian or Justin.
I think that's right, Peter, but the advantage is in the petroleum reservoirs. It's not in the saltwater ocean. Nobody really knows what that's like.
They're leaking.
Yeah.
Well, I know that 5 days ago, the Northern Lights project in Norway turned on the switch. And they say starting this year, their target is to sequester 1 million cubic tons and grow to 5 million cubic tons annually by the end of this decade.
Yeah, so that's a small project. Like the projects that I've done, I used to own 11% of Weyburn, so that's a decent sized project. Started about 2000. We did carbon trunk line, we did the refinery, we did enhance. Those projects will have put about 50 million tons of CO2 in the ground mid-decade. Sometime this decade, we'll have put 50 million tons of CO2 in the ground. So when somebody talks about a startup in Norway doing 1 million tons, good work, but it's not very much.
And you also talk about the cost, and the cost of doing this thing here is about $10 to $20, $30 maximum to store the CO2. That project in Norway is $120 per ton to store the CO2 because you have to liquefy, put it on a ship, put it in a reservoir, 100 kilometers in the open sea, down 3 kilometers. There's cost to it. So there's a big cost difference.
So one of the interesting things, though, about that project is it started with the Norwegian government, and it's now a joint venture with the idea that it's moving towards commercialization. Do we have an opportunity to create that same kind of environment in Alberta? Because, Peter, you talk about so many opportunities to store carbon. What's the commercialized value and opportunity there? And how do we go about realizing that?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer. I mean, we're trying to put a price on carbon and trying to get the stimulus, the economic incentives to put the carbon underground. I mean, the challenge, frankly, is that CCS is a waste disposal business. Let's just call it bluntly for what it is. It's a waste disposal business. And so the economic incentives have to be there to dispose of the waste. Now, this is not unique. I mean, all sorts of industries, not just the oil and gas industry, create waste of some sort, resource industries, and that they have various mechanisms of disposal in a responsible manner. It's just that we still have to crack this nut, frankly, of how to create the economic conditions to be able to stimulate the investment required to catalyze this waste disposal business.
Yeah, and I mean, that's one of the advantages here that wasn't mentioned. We have the tier system, and there's a durable, it's been here 10 years now. We all understand how it works. And that's one of the big assets in doing this. There's, $65, maybe $85 a ton to put the CO2 in. To clean it up from a reformer that's 60% pure, that costs $65 a ton. So you got to pipeline it and dispose of it inside that envelope if you think there's any risk on the federal tax credits. Now, so far, the federal numbers have been north of 200 a ton. So you can get that to work. If you add that to tier, you're in a place where you can probably do all this stuff. But if that federal CFS tax credit goes away, you got to work in an $85 a ton envelope, and that's tough to do.
So just to add a little more color to what Ian's saying, TIER is the carbon levy that Alberta government applies to high industrial emitters. Our organization, Emissions Reduction Alberta, uses portions of that fund to reinvest into technologies, late stage technologies, to facilitate commercialization of carbon reduction, emission reduction technologies. So 2 years ago, we funded 11 different pre-feasibility studies for carbon capture sequestration projects across sectors: cement, fertilizer, oil and gas, power generation. A lot of those results are coming back, and we're starting to learn a lot. So in most instances, it's technically feasible to do this. In a number of instances, it's not currently economically feasible to do this. And it depends on the sector. It depends on a variety of factors. The governments, both provincial and federal, have done all kinds of things over the past few years to heighten the economic attractiveness for it. But we still have a ways to go. This is expensive stuff.
So just before you go there, we have a clip from Brian Jean, who is very enthusiastic, of course, about the sector. And I want to introduce the idea, what role does the political climate play in our ability to move forward? Arav, can you play that clip, please?
Hi, I'm Brian Jean, Alberta's Minister of Energy and Minerals. For decades, resource development has been a key driver of Alberta's economy, attracting billions of dollars of investment and creating good-paying jobs. That's why we as Albertans and as Canadians need to continue to support and invest in today's energy system, while also positioning ourselves at the forefront of innovation so we can be the energy solution of tomorrow. This is also why Alberta advocates for advancing carbon capture, utilization and storage, or CCUS. For more than a decade, the Alberta government has supported CCUS by establishing a regulatory framework and infrastructure for industry. This is no small feat. And to date, we've invested more than $1.8 billion to support CCUS-related projects and programs. And since 2015, the Quest and Alberta Carbon Trunkline projects have safely captured and stored a total of more than 14 million tons of carbon dioxide, which is the equivalent of emissions from 3 million cars per year. Moving forward, Alberta continues to lead the way by developing carbon storage hubs and accepting applications for small-scale and remote carbon sequestration projects. These hubs will actually play a critical role in helping Alberta produce the most ethical energy on the planet and will help us further diversify the energy sector. To accelerate development of CCUS, the province is also supporting the Alberta Carbon Capture Incentive Program, so facilities can build emissions reduction efforts directly into their operations. By taking these steps today, we are making sure we will have sustainable prosperity now and can protect our environment for our kids, our grandkids, and for future generations.
Sounds like it's a done deal, doesn't it? But what role does that kind of support on so many different levels play in our ability to move forward? Claude?
Well, I'd like to compliment that. I know there's a bit of a tension between Alberta and the federal government, but there's a new player at the federal level, and that player is Canada Growth Fund. And they have $15 billion to assign to projects like carbon capture and $7.5 billion for contract for difference and for offtake agreement over 15 years. So this is a market maker in Alberta to allow some projects to go ahead, giving some certainty on the pricing of uncertainty of the political landscape that we see. So this is a new element that we've seen only in the last 6 months.
Deborah.
Yeah, so what we really need to see is policy certainty and understanding where the government's going to come to the table. And I think, what Claude just mentioned, the Canada Growth Fund, but we also, we talk about Pathways Alliance and the $16 billion that is still sitting, waiting to be invested to make this carbon network that will really support development of the oil sands. And I think that's the piece that we have to realize, is that if we get this right, then you can continue to develop a resource that will continue to provide revenues for generations to not just Alberta but to the country as well. Until we have the policy certainty and we have the numbers, we're waiting, and we've been talking about it for a while.
Sorry.
Yeah, and I think what Deb said is right on. And one of the unique things I think about carbon capture is that it does pretty uniquely two things. It solves an immediate need, an immediate problem in terms of emissions abatement, right? But then it also sets us up for the future in terms of the economy we want to develop and success in a net zero economy. And I think there's no doubt that developing these projects it requires government support, which we have through TIER, through ASIF, and through the federal credits. I think in the long term, if there can be reliance and a mature carbon tax, people can rely on that. In the short term, I think you need these incentives. And the Canada Growth Fund, it's interesting because the government's picking winners and losers, which always makes me a bit nervous. But it's a game changer, right? We've seen Strathcona and others receive that grant, and it is helping move these things forward. And I think in order to see that future that we want to see and this industry to move forward for all the good reasons discussed, we need that momentum and we need to get things built.
So I don't want to sound like one of those guys from the Muppets, the old guys, but that's what I look like. So get away with it. So I mean, it sounds like a lot of money, but small in hand. So the trunk line's designed for 15 million tons a year. Right now it's running about 2 million tons. What we thought when we built it was, we'll take away the pipeline part of the risk so someone can plug on with something new and take a chance on getting it to work, and the pipeline whole thing isn't bet on that. But if you think of 15 million tons a year, and then you think of $300 a ton to get the whole system to work, the amount of money in Canada Growth Fund doesn't last very long. That's not very much money in this world. I mean, it sounds like a lot when you say, Christ, $7.5 billion. Wow, that's a lot of money. It is, but it'll get soaked up in a couple of projects because that's the size of the number you're dealing with. So I don't think the government can take that much risk. And I also think that it has to be durable over multiple election cycles. It's not just one cycle. It's like, these are 20 to 30 year projects. I got to know what the carbon tax is going to be over 30 years, not over 4 years. So that's what's so great about Alberta. It's durable here. Even when the NDP was here, they were still on the page of keeping the TIER in effect, doing all the stuff. There wasn't any big dispute about that. And the tax system is durable in Alberta. The regulatory system is durable. You understand what you're getting into. When the feds come and swamp this thing with something that's so big and so pervasive, I don't think anybody believes it's going to be here for I sure don't believe it's going to be here for multiple election cycles. So you can't. It's a big help, but it isn't enough to get this done.
The challenge I have is I need to demonstrate my first of a kind.
Yeah.
Until I get 1 or 2 done,
yeah.
Nobody's going to want to be the first guinea pig.
Yeah.
That's helping to de-risk that industry.
Maybe that's right.
That's the way to use it.
So on the technology stuff, I think it's really a good thing. But on the big infrastructure project, it doesn't make it makes a difference, but it's not the only thing.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
So if I can just add, everyone globally right now is making a variety of CCS announcements. We have a whole bunch of CCS announcements in the US from the Inflation Reduction Act. Europe has put forward a number of proposals, as have we. Everyone's waiting to see which of these projects actually get to the final investment decision. And that is a small number at this point, despite all of the incentives. But what you're seeing in Alberta, 2 of our most recent big FID announcements were Dow, which is a $10 billion plus project, and Air Products, which is a $1.5 billion project. They have CCS-enabled elements to their projects, but they don't stop there. They're making end products with it. They're making hydrogen, they're making petrochemicals and other things. So they're able to charge a green premium in some instances for this low carbon production that they're facilitating. So that's enhanced their economics and made it easier to make the economic case to put these expensive investments in. When you're just developing something to dispose of CO2 and you don't get an economic uplift from that disposal, it's a bigger challenge and a bigger hurdle.
Peter.
Yeah, let me offer a slightly different perspective. So, as I said, bluntly, this is a waste disposal business. It's a cost, and somebody has to pay. Minister Jean suggests, or not more than suggests, the province of Alberta is paying, what was the number, $2 billion or something like that. Norway subsidizes, the IRA, the American public subsidizes this cost, right? The thing is that in the Western world, we only produce, like the United States, Canada, and the North Sea, the amount of oil produced in the, what I would call it, the free markets is only about 20%, maybe maximum 25. Okay. The other 75% of the world is not doing waste disposal. Okay. So building on this, there's $70 today US, $70 US today in a barrel of oil. So out of that barrel of oil, out of that $70, there has to be money. A slice of that $70 has to go to this waste disposal business. I don't know, Ian, whatever it is, 50 cents, maybe a buck. So the point is that if every country in the world was doing CCS, then the price of oil would percolate to $71 a barrel, hypothetically. And would trickle down into the price of your gasoline, a few cents a liter, and we'd all pay for the waste disposal business. This is the way that it works in every other resource industry or industry, whether it's fertilizers or whatever. There's the cost of clean production. And ultimately, if there's incremental costs associated with cleaning up production, it trickles through ultimately to the end use consumer. The challenge here is that not everybody in the world is doing it. And so the amount of value in the barrel of oil is $70 because it is a global commodity. It doesn't percolate up to 71 so that we can pay, it can be broadly paid for. So therefore, you and I, every one of us as taxpayers, is being asked to subsidize this. And we're okay with it to a certain point, and some people are not okay with it. And frankly, the redeeming feature of all of this is that the resource owner, which in this case is the province of Alberta dominantly, is a shareholder in the production and gets royalties, and the federal government gets income taxes, and we do as well, of the tune of about $30 billion a year. Our federal deficit is 50. So we need to maintain this resource production, and paying this extra incremental amount is a cost of maintaining our revenue streams to the treasury, so frankly, we don't go bankrupt. So, I don't know, is that?
And we pay for our waste disposal on a household basis, right? So this is actually the way to look at it in terms of how you just...
But we forgot about something. When I started this in 2001, there was no CO2 taxes. We didn't think about that. We just came off Weyburn. So we were running Weyburn. We put some CO2 in the ground, and 2 barrels of oil come out for every ton of CO2 we put in. So use $70. Just use $70. So I get $140 back when I put that ton of CO2 in the ground. That helps to pay for everything. In central Alberta, there's 1 billion barrels of that kind of oil. We found all this stuff in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and 70s. Those are some of the best reservoirs in the world. They're all sitting there waiting. When we put CO2 in, oil comes out. Somebody in the federal government decided that's bad. You don't want any more oil. Even if it's the lowest CO2 oil in the planet, we don't want to get it out. So we're going to do pure sequestration. We're going to make it a garbage dump. That's what we want. We want to pay for a garbage dump. Only problem is nobody can afford to pay for the garbage dump. It's too expensive. If we put it in EOR reservoirs and got the oil out, that would pay for the system. And then we'd take the next step and it would be a paid for garbage dump that was all developed. then we could pay the costs, a little bit cost, because they'd be way less than they are now, because we've got to build all this stuff to get the CO2, to move it, and to put it in the garbage dump. We just forgot about EOR. We don't need a garbage dump here for a long time.
EOR is the U, in my opinion, in the CCUS. You find another use for the carbon. That's the U.
We got
It's
it.
just strict CCS, carbon capture off the flue stack, liquefy, put it in a pipe and put it in the ground,
Blue stack is $200
storage.
a ton.
Then it's a waste disposal business.
Yeah.
But now there's big debate about what kind of the use, because if the use can generate value, as you suggest, then okay, fine, there's another way of paying for it.
How
Right, but
Waybrink's
if
been
there's
running
no
for
U,
20 years is not
it's
a
basically
suggestion.
got to be taxpayer subsidized.
Yeah,
But the social cost of inaction is all the extreme weather condition that we get, and you divide the damages you need to cover as a government, and you divide by the ton of CO2. It's about costs $190 per ton. So if you have a solution to capture and do a waste disposal or carbon management at $150 per ton, you're still below. And that's going to go to $300 per ton with the damages that are going to be increasing. There's some countries and some places in the world where you cannot insure your house anymore. So I think we have to look at it, Raoul, from a society point of view. So social cost, $190. Think about this.
Well, when you frame it that way, I mean, everybody's got to do it. Who's going to pay for it? You have to pay $500 a month. You going to do it? No one on an individual basis is going to pay that amount of money. We have a system here where we put CO2 in the ground and we get oil out. That's going to pay for a lot of the system. How can that be bad? Why don't we do what we can do? We started doing this 20 years ago. We've done, we're putting a bunch of CO2. We put sometime this decade, we'll have put 50 million tons of CO2 in the ground, where all these other guys are talking about it. Let's get going. Let's do something.
So Ian, that is one of the knocks on that NGOs and environmentalists have against carbon capture. They go, well, what are you using it for? If you're using it to produce more oil, and has been pointed out to me, you got to be careful about that kind of public.
There isn't a home for an infinite amount of oil. We use 100 million barrels a year or a day. So if we make another million barrels from something that's the lowest carbon intensity on the planet, we'll displace something that's high carbon intensity. It's not infinite. If we make more, it doesn't just go away. We're only using 100 million.
So I think the point about use is a good one, right? It has oil recovery, and we should be doing that. I think also, and maybe
Broadly speaking, I think we have agreed, at least right now, that we are going to pay for decarbonization. And I think if the goal is decarbonization, then carbon capture is a no-brainer. The technology is here. We can deploy it quickly and at scale. We can use it to create value. To Ian's point, it allows us to continue to produce and could get value from existing industry, and then again sets us up for the future economy. So in terms of if we take the premise that we have, at least for the moment, agreed to pay for decarbonization in society, and for my dollar, it's the best dollar spent of all the options.
Deborah.
Sorry, I also think that when we look at what we can do in Alberta, this is a way to help decarbonize the global industrial complex. It's not just about Alberta. This is about industries around the world where we can actually use the technology that we're deploying here elsewhere. And I think that's something we also have to think about. This is not just about Alberta. This is about the global industrial complex. And let's put it to work and benefit everybody on the planet.
I really agree with that. I think this is a place where we develop things, we turn them into world-scale businesses, but it just takes a while. And so we're developing the things like there's been some really promising stuff that's come out of ERA, but it's not ready for prime time yet. It's on the continuum to prime time. I mean, we invent stuff like that here. This is the most entrepreneurial place in the world. And now those things will be sold to the world when we're finished, but they're not ready yet. They're not big enough to make a difference.
Yeah. So just to throw a wrench into the works here, went down and caught up with David Keith of Carbon Engineering and also the Harvard Geoengineering Research Project. And he goes, okay, carbon capture, one thing. What about carbon reduction? But he went on a step further. I got just a clip from him saying, what we need to do, because Zach, you were talking about decarbonization. It's like He says there's more than just carbon capture. Let's just run that short clip from David Keith, the four-dimensional elements of RF.
Well, I think we have to think in four dimensions. I think the number one thing we need to do is to decarbonize the energy system. And that's most of all by switching from fossil fuels to solar or nuclear power. And so I think that's job one and the place I'd put most of my effort. But that's only one of kind of four ways we can deal with climate risk. We can deal with climate risk by decarbonizing, by carbon removal, by solar geoengineering, which is deliberately making the Earth more reflective to offset some of the risks of accumulated greenhouse gases, and then by local adaptation measures. So those are the four different kind of physical pathways humans can limit climate risk. And I would say we need to think about this as a four-dimensional problem. You can't think that you're only going to do this with one of those tools.
Interesting about where he starts. He says, well, we've got to start to reduce use, but all projections are use of fossil fuel energy is not going down anytime soon. So where do we go? Like carbon capture being one, but he talks about carbon reduction. Is this practical?
It's practical, it's just expensive.
Yeah.
So we're fighting about how we're going to pay for $150 per ton. This is a $300 to $500 per ton, on its way maybe to $200 to $300 per ton. So yes, we need to experiment with it. We need to demonstrate this thing, but this is like the second wave. The first wave has to be, let's get the bending the curve of the net zero with managing our carbon first and monetizing and finding ways to monetize the CO2 at the price point of $150 per ton.
Is net zero possible without carbon capture?
No.
It's an all of the above conversation.
Yeah,
it's carbon capture, it's direct air capture, it's all the other technologies that are in process of being developed and have yet to be developed. I also think we still have a lot of magical thinking going on in terms of whether you can actually, renewable power, nuclear. Let's talk about how long it'll take a nuclear reactor, an SMR, to be actually approved, permitted, and running. From a transmission grid perspective, there are so many challenges in terms of reliability. This is the quintessential and conversation, and we are in the first inning.
Justin.
So yes, we talked a lot about how we need a variety of these different technologies. We have to look at this long term, and when you're evolving industrial production systems, they don't happen overnight. A lot of the investments we're making at ERA relate to industrial technology development that has to be demonstrated and trialed, sometimes over several years. And someone has to be the first to try. And the first is always really expensive, and it doesn't get cheaper until you start to scale and develop. So we're seeing this with nuclear small modular reactors, which everyone is very interested in now. But no one wants to be the first in because they're really expensive, and they will be really expensive until you scale the production and they produce efficiently, and we can get economies of scale going. Same with CCS, same with a variety of these carbon reduction technologies. Incidentally, we were one of the early investors into carbon engineering in David Keith's company, and he just sold it for $1 billion plus last year because of the Inflation Reduction.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. Peter.
Yeah, a couple of points. I mean, I find the question you posed is a little bit misleading. Okay. The question was,
we forgot
if we don't do carbon capture, is net zero possible? Okay, so fossil fuels don't emit anything. Okay, people who burn fossil fuels emit, and devices that make carbon emissions. The extraction of fossil fuels in the oil and gas industry are only about 15% of the total emissions that are produced in a barrel of oil. That means 85% of the emissions are created when you turn on the ignition of your vehicle, if you have a combustion vehicle. It basically gets blown out the tailpipe. So net zero is also overwhelmingly not achievable until people who make decisions about burning fossil fuels change their attitude. And I think I'll go further to this. If I think, let me throw a thought experiment out at you. Imagine you're the health minister, right? And you're trying to deal with the obesity crisis. And you say, okay, I'm going to deal with the obesity crisis. I am going to try and put the farmers out of business. Right? I mean, this is effectively what we're assuming in the supply chain, where the bulk of the problem, we know as individuals, if we're trying to lose a few pounds, we realize that we need to switch our diet, which is what David Keith is basically saying, is the first order of business is to stop burning, because that's a decision we make every day, and switch to a renewable type of source, right? Or maybe become more efficient and more responsible about how we burn our fossil fuels so we do less. Metaphorically, go to the gym and maybe work off a few pounds. You know, it's these kind of things that we need to kind of put into perspective, because there's this belief that, oh, if we do carbon capture and if the whole oil industry and power industry and beyond does carbon capture, we're okay. And the danger in that is absolving the broad population of any responsibility. Because they say, okay, fine, those carbon engineers and scientists, they'll figure it out. I don't have to do anything. Well, that's absolutely not true. We are all in this together.
So there's a question that's come in, and I think it's an interesting one about, okay, so we have identified that there are storage, great storage capabilities here in Alberta. Who monitors them to make sure that they're okay? And what are some of the geological challenges that we face in ensuring that when we do capture that carbon, that's where it's going to stay?
We got the best regulator in the world. We got the best regulations in the world. Everything's carefully monitored. There hasn't been a leak of anything that was done. And that, you know, I mean, you can be nervous about it, but it's well done here, better done than any other place in the world. And so if you're worried about places, don't worry about Canada, worry about some of the other places where we're doing it.
Yeah, and we have years of doing that, of monitoring, measuring, and verification that's proven that true, and absolutely right. World leading, safe, efficient regulation.
You know, Ian, you were talking earlier about these experiments in burying carbon under the sea. In the United States, though, they have challenges that they find it very difficult to find the locations in which that they can bury carbon on land, because they have a different legislative environment than we have here in Alberta. And is that not one of Alberta's other advantages?
Yeah, I mean, single pore space owner is a big advantage. So in the States, when you own your house, you own to the center of the earth below it. So when you do these carbon injection projects, the areas can be enormous. So I think the zero pressure boundary on the Quest project is about 80 kilometers away from where the injector is. So you think, wow, that's a big area. If I had to deal with every person that had a house in that area, I'd never finish. I'd be in lawsuits forever. In Alberta, there's a single pore space owner. So I can deal with that one pore space owner, know what the rules are, know what, you know, the system is, how I can do it. You can't do that in the States. That's why they're going offshore. So they're either going to old oil reserves where the ownership issues were discovered and were well figured out in the past, or they're going offshore where it's the government that owns to the center of the earth.
Claude, where to from here for Svante? What's next for Svante?
Well, for those who don't know Svante, we are a pure player. We live or die with carbon capture and removal. So if it happens, we live. If it doesn't, we die. Simple. So we're all in, number one. We basically have been at it for 16 years. Last 8 years, we took it from the size of, I could wrap my hands around a contactor, and now I have one the size of this room here that basically capable to do 200,000 ton, 1 million ton capacity. So we raised $600 million US to get to where we are today. We spend, without any purchase order, $165 million Canadian in a factory to make filters, because nobody else makes the filters in the world. So build it and they'll come. We're at the point now they have to come. So we're starting up the plant. So we're working, so we've scaled up the technology, we've built the factory, we've de-risked all of this. Now we need to get to FID on the first few of a kind.
Sounds like you're from Alberta.
Well, like this, so that's I spend my time. So Alberta is a place where we're looking at 4 projects here in the region in which we could basically do our first of a kind project. But I need somebody to pay for the CO2. And paying for the CO2, that's right now we're working with some of our emitters, but they have hesitation because of the political climate. They don't know if the policy is going to be there or not. So we've used Canada Growth Fund as a market maker for us to have certainty on our first few of a kind. Once we demonstrate this few of a kind, there's a lot of funding available from infrastructure funds to basically deploy this thing worldwide.
What's the economic potential? I know, Peter, you talked about it. We're talking about waste disposal. But when there is technological advances in waste disposal and we become experts at it, it can become an export industry as well as grow homegrown industry. What is the economic potential of becoming true world leaders? Or maybe we're already there, but what's the future look like? Zach? And then I'll come to you, Peter.
Because I think the projected market varies, but upwards of $200 billion globally, 70% of that to be spent in North America and Europe. And that's just for the carbon capture facilities themselves, not including the indirect benefits around the greening of the economy, cement, steel, and that kind of thing. I think, as we've discussed, Alberta has some very unique combination of characteristics that make it a leading jurisdiction to capture much more than our fair share of that market.
Peter.
Well, I don't have the numbers at the top of my head, but I think, yes, if we're committed, certainly in the Western world and beyond in this, it's a huge market. I think it's got to be much more than that. I mean, I'm just trying to do the mental math in my head. I mean, the sale of oil and gas, again, don't quote me on this, but I mean, it's at least $7 trillion a year. Like, it's not 100 million barrels a year, even it's 100 million barrels a day, multiplied by 70, multiplied by 365, and that doesn't include the natural gas. So even if you say it's, if the cost of producing a barrel, if the cost of waste disposal on a 1 barrel is say 1%, even so 1% of 7 trillion is, what is that, 70 billion a year? So I mean, it's got to be much more than that.
But really, it's really a question of how much you're prepared to pay. So you can't define the market. You say, where's the revenue coming from? How much? If it's $50 a ton, it's not a very big market. If it's 100, it's bigger. If it's 500, it's really big. You can do lots of stuff at 500.
I think there's a lot of uncertainty, but the point is, it's a large market, right? And it's unclear how quickly it will transition.
Not
and where,
at $65 a ton, it isn't.
No, fair enough. Fair enough.
So
Claude, and then Deborah.
our business model is based on, well, people think we're crazy, but anyway, I'm working from 10 gigaton. So 10 gigaton is 10 for most people. 10 gigaton is 10,000 plant of 1 million ton. We have 2 in Canada doing 1 million ton, yes? So we need to do 10,000 of those in the next 30 years to get 10 gigaton. So if I want 30% market share, that's my math that I've done, that's 3,000 divided by 30 years, this is 100 plants every year. So basically 2 a week. We're gonna miss next week, the week after, and we're gonna have to catch up. We're building a factory, commissioning this one, build it and they'll come, to do 10 plants of 1 million ton a year in filter capacity. You need to have faith that this is happening. But that's the scale in which this is a unique opportunity for the industry. In Canada, we're in the best place to be able to demonstrate and use the technology.
Deborah.
There's an opportunity cost. If we don't move, we're going to lose a lot of upside. And I think that's the piece that we're all quite frustrated with in terms of this mentality that someone's going to be, we're really good at being first to be second. That's sort of where we're at. And we just need to take that risk to be first and to make sure that we don't miss the opportunity, because the economic costs of not moving and taking advantage of what's here are significant, not just for this province, but for companies like Claude's and for the world. Like this is the place where it's going to happen. This is where it can have the potential to move forward, and we need to seize the opportunity.
Somebody asked me recently, he says, how come Canada has all these technology and carbon capture developed in Canada? And then what's going on in Canada that you guys have ideas to create solution for this? I said, well, my answer is that we invented basketball, Canadian, and the American took it and made it a national sport. Think about this.
First to be second.
So the other problem that exists with these things is the only ones that have been done, someone owned the whole system at the start. And you figured out all the risks and how to apportion them and how to do that. And then once you got it working, you broke it apart. So what we did is we built a refinery. It was designed for carbon capture. We built a pipeline. It was designed to move carbon, and we bought a reservoir. All of that was in one group. That was just sat in my office for a long time. And then once we got it figured out, once we had the refinery building and it was producing CO2 and everybody believed there was going to be a refinery there, then we could build a pipeline. And we knew the reservoir. We didn't have any reservoir risk. We knew it would go in there. We knew what the reservoir. So we could break apart the pipeline, which is inherently a low cost of capital if it's in the right toll-paying environment. So we tried to break the capital off, break the pipeline off from the rest of the system to reduce the overall cost of capital, the rent that the system had to pay to operate. We could reduce it, but we had to own the whole thing at the start to do that because we couldn't apportion the risks properly. If we didn't own the whole thing, we couldn't divide up the risks right. And so I think that's a significant impediment. I think there is a role for the government in some of those kind of things. I think they could fit in and say, look, we'll make sure you get the right cost of capital at the end. If you blow it up in the middle, sorry, that's your problem. But we'll make sure you get the right pieces with the right cost of capital. That would help a lot. And it wouldn't bet the whole farm when we did it.
I also think an important part for the government to play is that financial safety net on the operating costs, so some form of contract for differences, which I know they're negotiating 101, but I think that some clarity and certainty on that policy lever is key as well.
And that's what the Canada Growth Fund is supposed to do, but it's just not big enough to cover what's needed, and that's the ongoing negotiating point.
So we started this evening with the question of what are our advantages and at what cost are we able to realize them? We're running out of time here, and I'd like to ask you all for a closing statement about, based on our conversation today, what do you think the immediate future looks like, and what do we need to do so that we don't come in second, Deborah, in the next 5 to 10 years? We actually come in first. I'll work my way down the panel. Start with you, Justin.
So as we talked about, CCS isn't new. We're doing it and have been doing it for some time. And there's a lot of industry interest in moving forward with it. We have an excellent facilitative government structure, both federally and provincially now, to enable that development. And we've demonstrated its technical feasibility, but the economics are still challenged. And we need to continue to work at technology development, advanced technology development, to get those costs down. We have to work at other incentives and tools and business cases in order to alleviate some of the cost pressures. One of the things we didn't talk about was sort of the supply chain and labor force issues that may come as a result of a big boom of this kind of industrial development that we're going to have to prepare for as well. So I think we need to keep working away at it, but this province has had dramatic success already with the announcements I already mentioned to you, both major and minor. And that is going to keep our workers busy for some time, but we've got to keep working away at the other business cases for a number of these other important developments in the province.
Ian.
Boy, you surprised me. I thought you were working this way.
Yeah. I'm going to jump around.
So this is a good place. If we focus on doing incremental things rather than moonshots, I think we'll be a lot more successful. And so these are really big systems. They're really significant amounts of capital have to be expended to do anything significant. If you focus on small changes, you can do it. If you focus on, I'm going to do a moonshot, it takes a long time to do a moonshot, and there's only been one that I know of that was ever successful. So we have to spend part of our money on moonshot, but don't spend the whole thing on moonshot. Let's spend a little bit on trying to do stuff that we know how to do.
Zach.
Yeah, I think it's well covered today why, like, Alberta is quite clearly the leading jurisdiction for this technology, right? I think, and for us to invest in it, to me, again, it just makes sense for the reasons that we discussed. It solves an immediate problem to decarbonize, right? And it sets our province up for long-term prosperity and economic development in the future economy, attracting other industries, green, cement, etc., potentially rare earth processing. Who knows what it could do if we offer that solution? I think in order to do that, we need to build that enabling infrastructure, and I think we need partnership with government to do that, which we have. We need to get that momentum. To Deb's point, we don't want to be second, so let's go. We need some wins, and we need some runs in that first inning.
So, Claude, I find it interesting, of course, Svante is a BC-based business, and we're talking about Alberta's advantages from your perspective. What makes Alberta unique, and how much of your growth going forward is going to be focused in Alberta?
There's only 3 places where you can apply ITC in Canada, so BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. So there's no spore space in BC, and a bit in Manitoba and in Saskatchewan, and then Alberta is all this thing. But I'd like to finish up on maybe a philosopher. You know, Martin Luther King did not say, "I have a nightmare." He said, "I have a dream." So we need to change the narrative about hard to abate. It's affordable to abate carbon management. If we start thinking like this, we will find a way of making it affordable. And it will become affordable if we have industrial policies that puts a carbon intensity on every single product we make. And everybody making anything in the world as a carbon intensity pays its $150 per ton for it. That's how you get $1,500 per capita in Canada to do this thing. That's the cost of your waste management, by the way.
Marks and Spencer tried that. They had a carbon footprint on everything they were selling, and they took it off because nobody was responding. The consumer behavior didn't respond.
We need to
but I think, what we do need is that policy certainty. If we don't have policy certainty, there's the investment will not happen. And it has to be something that endures through election cycles and is not going to be altered. We have governments that also like to go back and change the rules. The rules can't change. They have to respond and be flexible, but they cannot change, which compromises the investment strategy. So I think that's one of the most important things. But the other thing is Alberta, it's not just, it is energy. Absolutely, we're an energy capital, but there is agriculture that is also going to benefit from this technology. There's beer, we capture it. So there's so many other industries that will benefit from the technology that's being developed here. But let's think about the fact we need to feed the world. We need to heat the world, and we can do it here with the right kind of technology.
Peter.
Well, we started out with Justin effectively saying we have it all here. Right? I mean, we have all the ingredients that, I would say, 90% of the rest of the world does not have. So why are we not advancing faster on this imperative? It's an imperative. And further to Deborah's point about uncertainty in the policy, I would go further. The policy is unclear. It's not harmonized. The carbon markets are, frankly, dysfunctional and are not creating effective markets to price carbon effectively to be able to allow those who make decisions at boardroom tables make the billion-dollar decisions with confidence. And so, actually, it's a bit frustrating, frankly, because we have it all, and we just have to crack the nut on how to get the money flowing to create the certainty and remove the policy densities and complexities and disharmony. Is that a word? Disharmony? Okay, yeah. To get things to get the investments start rolling, and Claude, I think you've done a masterful job in getting it going. But I agree with Ian. I mean, it's and you would agree, I think, too. I mean, it's just a little blip on what is an immense problem, but it's doable. That's the thing, is because we have it all, and so we just have to just be a little more clever about how to design our markets, our policies, to get the financiers to be able to commit the billions that are needed to do it.
Well, Deborah.
I just wanted to, there's been a lot of discussion in recent months about the importance of the carbon markets globally, and how we really need to harmonize the international carbon markets because they're very fragmented and they also don't unlock the investment that we need to see. So it's not just an Alberta thing. It's something that we potentially could also lead on to as well. So
it's hard, and it's going to be hard. You quoted Martin Luther King. I thought of John Kennedy's Rice University speech when he was talking about the moonshot. He said, "We choose to go to the moon not because it's easy, but precisely because it is hard." And one of the elements of that is identifying what the challenges are, having continued conversations like this that help us hopefully draw more energy and more human resources towards addressing these problems. Thank you very much for your time tonight. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. To all of our panelists, you have a coveted Conversations Live mug. that you can take home, only available to panelists. And one last thing before we go, I want to once again encourage all of you here tonight who joined us online and in place to try and see whether or not there might be a way in which you can support the Calgary Police Youth Foundation. They're doing incredible work and they need support from all of us, the same way that we all need to work together to find ways in which to address the climate challenges that are ahead of us. Thank you for tuning into Conversations Live, an Oh Boy Productions program. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can find our previous and upcoming episodes at conversationslive.ca. You can also follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Again, thank you. I'm Stuart McNish.